Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 187 of the Immigration Lawyers Podcast. We have a great guest today, Laurie Tannous, who's been on the show many times, a Canadian immigration attorney, here to fill us in on what is happening with Canadian immigration. Originally, I booked her to come to talk about all the problems that are happening with going there and the difficulties. But actually, it just popped in my mind that I saw on LinkedIn that the Canadian immigration rules changed or some big thing happened where they're bringing more numbers. So we'll ask her about that if she has any tips and information about that, about this global migration aspect. She's also, does U.S. immigration as well and a former customs officer, so it's a great resource. Before we get started, I want to remind everybody that the Immigration Lawyers Toolbox magazine is available. Issue 1 is up at immigrationlawyerstoolbox.com/magazine. Issue number 2 should be coming up soon. It's going to be a lot of fun. I want to thank all the sponsors, Immi Translate, Immigration Finder, Journey, and I'm missing someone in there, but I apologize. But in particular, I want to thank Dropbox, DocketWise, one of our main sponsors, also a podcast sponsor, for all the help and support they've done, and they're a great service. They're the company I use as my immigration software provider, and they're just more than just the forms. They do all sorts of management software as well. If you wanted to get a 15% off or a 10% off, I can't remember how much the offer is right now, but it's in the description below how much off it is. Just go to DocketWise.com/immigration-lawyers-podcast, not toolbox, but podcast, and use the code Immigration Lawyers Podcast. If you're already a month-to-month member, you may have to email them to get that annual program, but definitely check it out. I recommend them. And also, if you're an immigration attorney and you're thinking, how do you prove to people you're a good immigration attorney? You've been doing it for a while, you have approval notices. I create a website called verifiedimmigrationlawyers.com. Just contact me about that info at Immigration Lawyers Toolbox. Just email me. You get information on that. And if you subscribe to that, you also get access to the Immigration Lawyers Toolbox video catalog library and a lot more. Just email me for information about that. And also, they have a course that trains you on marriage immigration. If you are a person that's getting involved in U.S. immigration, you're a different type of lawyer, just email me. We'll talk about that course and 12 hours of training plus office hours, all this kind of stuff. All right, without further ado, I'm going to bring on Laurie. Laurie, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me today, John. Much appreciated. Nice to see you again.
Thank you so much. So Laurie's in the thick of it, dealing with immigration on the customs side, on the legal side, U.S. border, Canadian side. You're really a Miss Immigration. So what is the biggest things happening in Canadian immigration that you want to fill us in on?
Right now, I think the biggest hurdle that we're seeing, is the inability of people to enter Canada who used to be able to just come without a problem. And I say that meaning everybody sort of has this understanding that the border is closed, and I put that in quotations because it's still open for essential travelers. And so people who used to consider themselves business travelers, meaning they would go into the United States for meetings, to have certain routine visits as part of their occupations, let's say in Canada. And these would be people who don't have work permits in the US because they're not technically working in the US. They're just going for a regular sales meeting or an update with maybe their client or their supplier, let's say. So in the past, prior to COVID, they would just need an introduction letter saying who they were going to visit, that they were going to be there for a few hours. And technically, and so this is where it gets complicated, they still should be allowed entry into the US. And although the US, we are not seeing too many denials of that, what we're seeing is that upon return, those types of individuals are being asked to quarantine and to test. And so this all came up within the last few weeks. So when the border initially was restricted March 2020, we were having this trade back and forth of these individuals who were going or even coming into Canada, let's say, for that same purpose from the US. And then the Canadian government just mid-March said, no, if you are crossing and you are not a regular cross-border worker, meaning a minimum of 1 to 2 times per week crossing that border, you must now have to quarantine for 14 days. You must have to have a negative test result taken within the last 72 hours in the United States, then get tested at the border, at the port of entry upon arrival into Canada, then given a home test kit to then go and get tested. And these are for people driving. For people flying, anybody flying into Canada now who's not considered exempt has to now stay for 3 days in a government mandated hotel. to quarantine until they get another test and then are allowed to go in quarantine to their next destination.
And you have to pay for that yourself too, which I've heard could be,
Yes.
$2,000 or something like that. It's not.
Oh
It's
yeah,
not.
upwards. It's and what we're hearing from people is that they're just not being provided with the basic necessities. They're calling multiple times, and obviously we understand that these hotels are stressed. This is all a new program, but just to get basic amenities like water and food, it's what you would get on a common airplane. Sounds like it's better than what's being provided to some of these people, unfortunately.
And I'm reading reports that the numbers in Canada are jumping high right now. They're becoming one of the biggest ones in the world. So these methods aren't necessarily doing what the goals are, other than restricting, cross-border trade in an extreme manner.
Well, you're 100% correct there, John. If you look at the data that's out there, the numbers in Canada are not necessarily coming from cross-border travel. They're more so coming from community transmission. Our schools were still open. We hadn't shut them down up until literally, I think it was maybe 5 or 6 days ago, that the announcement came out that at least in Ontario, the province where, that all the schools now were going to be going online to prevent further community transmission.
So that's crazy. You have young children yourself too. That's going to create another job.
Oh yeah, I've never been so good at science and French and math homework, so it's definitely a challenge.
Okay, so right now, cross-border trade. I mean, U.S. still has when you're going by if you're driving between countries, both Mexico and Canada, there's restrictions on non-essential travel, so that's still there.
Yep.
And so, I mean, there's again billions of dollars of trade that's up in the air. What's happening? So, I mean, is Canadian immigration essentially on hold right now? If you had other marriage cases and work cases right now, how's the immigration bar doing over there?
For me, I've never been busier, to be honest with you. I am still processing multiple cases. And for me, most of the work that I do is in the entertainment industry and those types of work permits. However, we do have some spousal permits and things like that. Things are taking a little bit longer, John, as I'm sure you could relate in the US, meaning due to taxation or taxed resources, I should say, limited resources within, IRCC, so our immigration services, things are taking a little bit longer to get interviews or biometrics, things like that. But on the contrary, what we're seeing is Canada saying, hey, and that's the announcement I think you were referring to earlier today, that came out yesterday, in fact, that said, if you are in Canada currently as a student, or as what we call a postgraduate work permit. So that's something that you get after having taken a course of study in Canada, that they are now saying you are allowed to stay and apply for permanent residency. You don't have to go back home to do it, which is amazing. So we are definitely open for immigration, legal immigration. Work permits are still being processed and PR applications are still being taken. They're just taking a little bit of time.
That's incredible. I mean, that must have been a nice gift for all the students that
Yes.
were doing travel and stuff. So that just created a ton of work and filings that probably jumped on your lap all of a sudden.
Yep, exactly.
Well, thanks for the updates. If there's anything else about Canadian immigration, let me know. If not, I wanted to just talk about how your practice is going. I mean, you're in the U.S. right now, and just what trends you're seeing and what plans you have for the rest of the year.
Yeah, so we're seeing, there's a big migration of movies that are being filmed in Toronto, and so we're seeing a lot of that happening. As they call it, North Hollywood, and part of the reason is I think that we see this. We've got really good practices, despite what we're hearing in terms of the numbers, because typically those movie sets will test every 3 days. There's certain COVID protocols that are in place, and so that's happening, and that's wonderful to see that sort of spike in the economy, especially because movies could be filmed outside of the U.S. or outside of Canada. When they're filmed here, we've got that cross-border regionalism, meaning they're in New York, they're in Toronto, and they're not going abroad. So that's always nice to see, at least for us here. This has been the most challenging time that I have had in my at least 16 years as an immigration immigration attorney. As you said, I was a former customs and immigration officer. And when I was there during 9/11. And I thought that that was the most difficult time that I had seen in terms of the border. And it was only closed for a day. So this is really unprecedented that we've got this, closure of the border. And although essential people who need medical services or who have cross-border families, custody, parenting time. So there are still a lot of people that can cross the border, but then there's a whole bunch that can't and that really need to, that have property. And so we're seeing a lot of that happening. Another project that I'm working on is just trying to get Canadians vaccinated in the US, something that, is really, again, unheard of, but because we're just especially because I'm on a border city, right? Trying to say, okay, how can we get more people vaccinated in a quicker way just to try and get this virus under control. So lots of things going on, lots of good moving parts. On the trade side, we've not seen any slowdown. So as it relates to the movement of trade, in fact, we've seen spikes, obviously, because of the surge of online shopping, right? So that's been a good bonus again for that North American cooperation of facilitated trade back and forth.
The demand for lumber alone has gotten skyrocketed. The price has skyrocketed, and Canada being the biggest source of U.S. lumber, that's probably a big thing. I'm guessing they're probably exempt from these stuff so they could bring the trucks over and stuff like that when they're shipping it.
Correct. Yeah. I think with so many people having been working from home, we've seen an increase of home improvements. So people who are taking on projects, we even put in a pool last year and did a lot of the work ourselves because we were home and we said, okay, hey, let's, we had a contractor obviously for the major stuff, but so you see a lot of that happening when people can't really travel or they're stuck at home, they're getting creative. And
in Canada, how many months a year can you use the pool, or is it like does it have a tarp? I mean, a roof over it? How does that work?
Yeah, it doesn't have a roof. It's heated, and so we are about to open it at the end of April. I just spoke to the pool company, and last year we kept it open until November because it was our first time with it. So we had a warmer November. Probably should be closed in October or September, but so we get at least four months out of it. Five if we're lucky. So my boys thankfully don't mind swimming in the cold, so it works.
Yeah. We just moved and we have a pool. My little kids, anything, they're just banging out the window in the morning to let them out to go and try to jump in the pool.
That's cute. No, it's a plus. It's a bonus. How about you? What's happening in your world? Lots of marriage petitions still happening?
Yeah, marriages, everything's happening except frustrations that I can't give answers on the timeline aspect, especially when I'm dealing with Chinese cases, European, Iranian cases, and Brazil, which are the 4 countries and regions that I work with the most. In Canada, too, the problem is we have consular processing cases where they go to the embassy. One is the embassy in Montreal is delayed, but they're starting to do interviews. But we had it where, they're waiting for the case to be finished. One time the Canadian will come visit the U.S. and sometimes the U.S. person visit Canada. That stopped because they can't have to go into quarantine when they just want to do a weekend trip or something. It doesn't make any sense. So it's led to separation of couples, and that's been pretty disastrous. Just, stress and toll of it. But business, I mean, what I realize is just if you do marketing and stuff, the pie just gets bigger and bigger. So all these videos that I do has been helpful, especially with the small practice that I have. But it's most of the pressure is on the clients, which then does come on us because you feel bad for them. They're separated from their families, and just these travel bans. But it seems like the Department of State is reopening certain things. They say they're reopening, but the numbers still aren't there. The embassy shutdowns are still happening. Right. How's Canadian consular processing? Is that same kind of shutdowns happening?
Yeah, it's still, we see this slow, painful process, right? Whereas before, to your point, if I had a client, because I have to submit my criminal rehabilitations. So for, let's say there's an American that wants to, do a spousal sponsorship, they want to come and work in Canada or even to visit. And if they've had previous criminality, we have to have that waived. So it's similar to your I-192 waiver or 2-112 waiver. So for us, we have to process those those at the Canadian consulates or embassies in the US. And so before I could say to my client, all right, I'm going to get a receipt within 3 months. They're going to ask for additional information in 6 months. And within 12 months, I believe you should have this. And it was like clockwork that I could make those estimates. Right now, it's like, God knows. I say to them, God knows, I really don't have an answer. And I feel really, really bad. So again, I understand that the consular processes are, they're doing the best that they can, the visa officers and the trade officers, but it sort of stalls the whole immigration pipeline, if you will. So things are open, but they're just moving very, very slow compared to what they were obviously pre-COVID.
One thing I wish on my goodie list, if I could, is if they allow these people waiting for consular processing, just use a tourist visa to enter the United States and adjust status, separate, make an exception for it like that. I mean, that kind of like the Canadians did with the student visas, just allowed them to stay to adjust.
Right.
In that context would be good, because these family separation is worse, but it's the work too. I mean, the new L1s were banned until end of March, and I have a lot of people in India right now just waiting to get the interview to come back or do whatever. So pandemic's been really disruptive, but hopefully it gets better. But immigration, global migration feels it the worst. And I mean, airlines probably feel it the worst, but we see it immediately in our practices. It's very interesting.
Right. No, we can see the trends as they're happening, right? And the number of people that had reached out when this first happened were like, get me into the US. And we were getting at least 5 to 10 calls a day. And I just didn't know how to help half of the people because they didn't have an exemption. They didn't have anything that would trigger an ability for them to go into the US. And so I feel quite badly that there's been many that I haven't been able to assist. And then there's others who have been patient with me as I'm working through the legislation, the new policies in Canada, at least our ordering councils, to try and understand, and they change them every month. So we get a new ordering council, probably around the 19th of every month. And so it's like teaching yourself immigration law all over again, because it's everything you thought you knew, you have to cast it aside and say, okay, this is a whole new set of rules every month. So thankfully I'm a quick reader, but it's still been frustrating. So
I've been telling people who are new to immigration, thinking about getting in, with all these changes, you're essentially on the same level playing field as someone who's been doing it for 20 years, because it's all new. You're all learning at the same time.
You're correct, John. I've had immigration attorneys referring me work, immigration attorneys that have been doing it for a long time, saying, look, I don't want to figure all this out. Like, it sounds like you're doing it. Go for it. Right. So, it's one of those things that we have to, and I'm fortunate. I've got a good team with me, experienced ladies that have been, had previous, decades long Canadian immigration experience. So that makes a difference when you have that kind of support with you.
How was the flight here? Was it empty or packed when you're coming to the US?
It's not bad. It's like, there's half of the flight. So it's not, and I've flown quite a few times actually in the last 6 months, and it's not been as bad as I thought it would be. On one hand, I think I expected that there would be a lot of people flying. And then on the other hand, I was like, oh, maybe the plane will be empty. And it's been a good mix, meaning, it hasn't been overpacked. I always fly Delta, that the middle row is always empty. So that's helpful in terms of traveling and just being concerned. And, we've been wearing masks in Canada since last March. So, I'm alone here, so I'm maskless, right? Otherwise, it's one of those things that now it's just sort of like a default to have it, to wear it and just stay safe.
So I have been on a plane. Do you see people wearing hazmat suits, or people just wear normal masks?
At the beginning, when I was flying back in August, I saw people they looked like they were coming out of Star Wars. It was really funny. They had like these Darth Vader things, and I was looking at them. A lot of people in garbage bags, honestly, or plastic just taped. Some of the hazmat suits, like you see all kinds, right? It's been interesting. I love people watching, but now it's even more interesting just to say, oh, how'd they come up with that? Okay, that's different, so.
Why not? It has like your own hotel room too in there, so you can kind of relax, especially because it's so, you crowd on the plane, you're so close. It kind of creates your own independent space as well.
Yes, yeah, it's good. It's good. No, I'm fortunate to be able to still travel and do the international business, and so I'm grateful. I'm grateful for that. So.
Yeah, luckily we do work that wasn't as effective. If anything, the recovery for us was really sharp. It was in March of last year where there was like a lull in business, but it jumped, and thankfully able to one of the main things, other than staying healthy, is just making money to support your family and the community and all that.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate you're going to be adding an article for the second issue of the
Yes.
Toolbox magazine about Canadian immigration. So thanks so much for your participation. Everyone can catch it at immigrationlawyerstoolbox.com/magazine. Stay on the line. I'm going to say bye to everyone, but I want to catch up a little bit more afterwards. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back with more soon. Bye-bye.